This is May the 23rd in the year 2001, and this is Gerry Burch interviewing Bruce Devitt, D-E-V-I-T-T. Bruce, in my estimation, was one of the top 6 foresters of the 1965 to 85 era. He was personable, popular, progressive, and professional. Although in his summer holidays, while taking forestry at the University of British Columbia, he worked with industry. Upon graduation, he accepted a job with the Ministry of Forests, then transferred to industry, then became the registrar with the Association of BC Professional Foresters, and eventually entered the consulting field. At the present time, he is a member of the Forest Appeals Commission of the BC government, administering the Forest Practices Code, and has been in this organization since its inception. I consider Bruce to be a forester's forester, with a great love for the woods and particularly silviculture and reforestation. His balanced view of controversial topics should be well worth listening to, as he is and was one of BC's leading field foresters for many years. And the famous question is, why forestry as your career?
Well, of course, growing up in a place like Bridge River and Lillooet, I was always keen on the outdoors. And my dad was an amateur geologist, come prospector, and we always were trekking around in the woods. He would have liked me to be a geologist. But when I got to UBC, in fact, the reason I went to UBC, there were 2 reasons. My dad, he got me a job for the summer digging post holes for the BC Electric. And one Friday afternoon at 4:30, he picked me up on the job, and we took the gas car to Lillooet, and we drove down through the canyon all night and got out to UBC in the morning, and he kicked me out the door and said, "Sign up." So that was one of the first reasons. And the second reason was I worked for an engineering firm. They were building there's a 400-man camp, and they were building a new penstocks and new turbines for the power plant at Bridge. And Mr. Binney, who was head of the project, I had a job washing dishes in the camp, and he said, "That's no place for a young fella," and he took me under his wing, and he gave me an engineering job. Oh, I was just a gopher, just a young kid, and they made me do all kinds of gopher type work. But that sort of got me into that mode. So those are the 2 reasons I went to university. I was the only white kid from our area that went to university. Well, there's a lot of Japanese up there. They moved them up there during the war.
To where?
To Bridge River. Yeah, well, there was an old... See, they were going to build this big power development, and the war came along and it stopped. Oh, yeah. And the whole camp was there. Oh, there was a big hotel and kitchen, and everything was there. It was just sitting there.
Well, I thought most of them went to Greenwood.
Well, some of them did, yes. Some of them, and Tashmi, and where Genji went, and all that. Yeah. But when the Japanese came into our area, that was the first time we had a doctor or a dentist. So there were some high caliber people got dislocated in that exercise. Dr. Miyazaki being one, and he got the Order of Canada a few years back for his work. Yeah.
Anyhow, you were talking about your first job with the Ministry of Forests, and you were talking about the Reforestation Division.
Yeah.
And you were talking about Harold McWilliams.
That's right. Harold McWilliams deemed that all the planting and everything that was needed had been done. Mainly it was planting of all the disasters on Vancouver Island, not thinking of the rest of the province. And
he also recommended that most of the Forest Service nurseries be cut back, didn't he?
Well, I saw a letter, and it's lost. I don't know if anybody will ever find it, but I saw a letter where basically the program had come to an end and it should be phased out.
The reforestation
that's right. Yeah, that's right.
I heard about that from Alf Bamford.
Yeah, and I actually did see the letter, but where it is today, it's tough. Yeah.
So what prompted the move to industry?
Well, we had a big program, and I was charging around the province, and there were a lot of disbelievers even in the Forest Service. And so finally I was in charge of tree seed and nurseries for the province. And this is leading up to why I left. Anyway, so all that stuff I was promoting and doing and trying to encourage planting and reforestation, both in ministry and industry-wise as well. It was a tough go in the interior because it was just starting. And Wilson wanted us to have 75 million trees by 1975. Then Eric left because he wanted to get out in the districts. He always wanted to go to the districts. He was a really good guy to work for, Eric. He let you get on with it. So then they moved Ted Knight in. And maybe this is something that maybe should not be said until parties have deceased, but actually in hindsight Ted did me a good favor, but at the time it was very difficult, and actually within a year Ted came 180 degrees because he was not a dumb man, he was a very smart man. Anyway, so Ted came along, and we used to get into humongous arguments, and all for naught, and we went on a few road trips which are good. But then I found that he was changing our orders and stuff like that. So I thought, oh heck, I can't take this anymore. And I'm not scared of a challenge, but I don't like, I just didn't, the atmosphere wasn't good. Yeah. So I was sitting at my desk one day, and the phone rings, and this fellow, it's a headhunter, and he says, there's this company looking for and he started to describe the job and everything, and so I started laughing. And he said, what? And I said, well, I knew the former incumbent, and I'm not interested in that job. Because, I know what he had to work under. I'm not interested in that. So anyway, the guy said, well, what do you think it would take to... So I listed about 6 things, just off the top of my head. And he said, well, that doesn't sound like a big problem. He said, maybe you should talk to the principal. So I went over to the Empress Hotel after work, and I met Bill Walters, who was a prince of a guy, yeah. And Bill and Morris Ayres, yeah. And we sat down and had a drink and a chat, and next thing I knew I was working for Pacific. Well, the chief forester's job in those days was always the conscience of the company in a sense, because you had to make sure that the government laws and everything were abided by, and trees got planted and all that kind of stuff. So you were, in a way, the conscience of the company. And in many respects, the chief forester of the province is the conscience of the government in that sense. Somehow we've lost sight of that in a way, but that was always my perspective. Yeah. The profession owes its existence to the support of all these groups called the public collectively. And if you get too inward looking, you're in danger of losing that support, and you put everything at risk, in the profession at risk.
What are your comments on clear cutting versus variable retention or partial cutting as a forestry practice in BC?
Well, I wish in some of this people would go back to the history of the development of silvicultural systems, and especially as to how they've been tried in this province. And it seems to me we just have to keep reinventing the wheel sometimes. But somehow you got to. I don't know how you're going to handle it, because you got so many desires here. You want to maintain a certain ecological regime and diversity in one type of forest. Well, the question is, do you want that everywhere? This is what the proponents of protectionism are saying. Well, you're leaving it open then to nature to manage it. And nature manages it extremely well through creating disasters of one type or another. You know, really, I mean, if you think about all the fires, we have all this mountain pine beetle in the interior now because of those huge fires in the interior that go back 100 years ago, right? And you create one great big age class, and now you've got a mountain pine beetle problem. With Pacific now, of course, we were operating on big clear cuts. The reason that some of the clear cuts became the size they did, well, in the early days, of course, when the ENN was selling timber, people would buy 1,000 acres, and then they'd log 1,000 acres and get some money, and then they'd buy another 1,000 acres, and that was just a natural progression. And there were all these different contractors out there, and you know, and everybody buying wood and all that. Well, eventually, when Sloan turned things around for Pacific and said we're going to manage our own lands, and stopped all that with the big fuss with M&B and Crown Zutterback and the court cases and all that. Did he tell you about those? Did he go into any of those?
No, I don't think so.
Anyway, he says he's got to keep quiet on them until everybody's dead. Anyway, we were doing a lot of logging at Souk, and there was all this so-called Pecker Poles. And they were nice, sound balsam, normally. That's what they were. And they were just getting trashed. So Bill Dwyer, who was one of our logging guys, supervisors, he and I were, well, I said to Bill, I said, look, Bill, they're actually wrecking wood that's going to take us 60 years to grow in terms of size. And it seems a shame that we're, you know, so the pulp market was pretty good, so we went and relogged a lot of these areas. Gerry, you wouldn't believe the piles of wood. It was unbelievable. It was cold decked everywhere. Wood just coming out. It shocked everybody. So it was good from that perspective because it really shocked people to see this wood piled up. Nowadays they would use it because of the sawmill technology. Oh, yeah. This changed, okay? But in those days they had a head rig that had to handle a log that this size, and you couldn't handle stuff like this, right? I did take the Sierra Club, the local Sierra Club, out on a field trip. We went from Massachi Lake Camp up the Robertson, Main, right up onto the top, over into the Fleet. And I gave them all, we had a little map orientation with the roads and the forest types on it. And of course we left the camp and we're driving through all that 1928, 29 railway logging, and it's all covered with trees and stuff like that. But as we started climbing up the hill, the trees are getting smaller and shorter, and finally we break up into this huge clear cut. It was all fireweed and as far as the eye could see. And we made our stop. Well, as we were driving up, I didn't say anything. Didn't say boo. Just told them where we were going. And everybody's having a good natter. But as we broke out of the treed area, you could hear a pin drop. It was so quiet. Everybody was just stunned. So we stopped, and Ken Dockersey was our chief forestry technician, supervisor. And I had been up there the day before, and we had staked out plots. So I got everybody out with a tape and a record, and I said, okay, there's the stakes. You guys crawl around in there and tell me how many trees you can find. So they went around in there, and I told them the conversion factor, and it came out to about 600 to 800 trees per acre. And they were all doing quite well, just covered up with the fireweed. So everybody said, oh, well, I guess it's planted and reforested all right, but there isn't enough trees. So I said, fine. We got in the bus, and down the road we went. Now they're like Christmas trees now. So we did the same thing, 600 to 800 trees per acre. Oh. Well, there still isn't enough trees. So we got down into a 1941 plantation down on the bottom there, and we drove in there. Of course, these trees are now quite big, and all the vegetation's gone because the canopy's closed, and there's nothing underneath, just moss and twigs and stuff. And I got them to count up, and gosh, 600 to 800 trees. And they didn't even know it was planted. They couldn't. If I hadn't told them it was planted, they wouldn't have known it was planted. So at the end of the day, I got a really nice letter from them, a really supportive letter. And the only criticism they had was we didn't have enough culverts in our roads. And they were right. We didn't have enough culverts in our roads. I worked on both tenures, both private and Crown. And I think private forestry, private land forestry, is only successful if you have an enlightened owner. The Crown land forestry is subject to so many lobbying, it's really tough to even get this continuity that one needs. So both have their constraints. However, I think the province would have been better off if it had somewhere between 15 and 20% private forest land instead of 5. But the province suffers from a lack of more private or simulated private ownership. Now there was, see, and again, it's this dilemma of how do you provide continuity, especially in this era of globalization, of management over a forest tract. The only companies that seem to have any kind of vested interest over a long haul right now are the pension funds, like John Hancock and people like that. They're only trying to get a hedge against inflation. So they've got their perspective is their horizon is a lot longer in time than what normal people have. And so this continuity issue is a big one in my mind. And unfortunately, you would think governments could supply that continuity, but they haven't demonstrated that they've been able to. We always thought that the forest should be tied to a mill. Yeah. And it's not anymore. They've separated the forest from the mill. Now, I used to believe that the woods had to be tied to the mill and you grew the product for the mill. And that was a homogeneous unit. And it's one of those ideas that's logical and it makes sense and it should happen. But it doesn't happen economically. Because what happens is, it depends on your vice presidents and your presidents. And I went through several changes. One minute you have a vice president whose priority is the pulp mill. Another vice president's priority is the sawmill. The other vice president's priority is the woodlands. And you get this big mix. Now, which is the profit center? Instead of looking at the whole unit as a profit center, and each one is supplying the needs of the other, you get into these fits of analysis and review all the time, number crunching and bottom line and blah, blah, blah. And indirectly what happens is the woodlands always end up subsidizing either the sawmill or the pulp mill because they're not getting a fair price for their logs. So what's happening now, and the sawmills end up, depending on the scenario, the sawmills end up subsidizing because 50% of the furnish is going to the ready pulp mill. That's right. You know, so you get this. So then I started thinking, well, maybe we do separate the woodlands from the manufacturing plants. Yeah. And maybe we go into woodlot. You know what I mean? Talking about remanufacturing logs and just selling them, right? Yeah. So now under that scenario, if we had that scenario, you could take a look at Finland and you could take a look at Sweden. And most of the holdings there are small private owners, right? I mean, the average hectare area size is 80 hectares. Yeah. Pretty hard to have an 80 hectare clear cut on an 80 hectare piece of property, isn't it? Huh?
Environmental groups.
They're
really preservationists.
They're really preservationists. And they really don't, if they do understand, and some of the more knowledgeable ones. Well, you remember, Gerry, the old Forest Land Use Liaison Committee? Yeah. Well, those guys came in there, the so-called all the environmental groups, and after a period of time, and it wasn't a very long period of time, we were basically all singing from the same song sheet. And you know, and we got Tuvi was chair, I think, when we got them to sign off on that reforestation issue, and they became quite supportive. And I don't know why they don't have any real vision of the world that is realistic. And why do the political forces listen to them? I do not understand.
Right. Log exports.
I'm a firm believer in log exports, and it goes back to utilization. If you can get your poor quality wood out and export it and make money at it, why not? You're not exporting jobs. You're going to leave those jobs in the woods if you don't, in terms of the poor quality. And the high quality wood, we butcher. So why not get top dollar for it and send it out where somebody else can get more quality out of it?
The argument against that is that once you open up the market, you open it up to large corporations, international or otherwise.
So what?
Cutting down their mills and sending everything high grade and low grade out of the country.
Well, yeah, but it hasn't happened, and the regulations are there, so it doesn't really happen, doesn't it?
Well,
if you go to a log market situation, it might happen.
But there would be mills probably closed down if you
well, some of them need to be closed down too, don't they?
Oh, well. Have you got any other comments you'd like to make for the record, Bruce? Either to do with controversial topics or people or...
I'd do it all over again if you asked me would I take up forestry.
Go ahead.
I think that we're going through a major transition right now, but we'll get out of it sooner or later. And you know, I think it's still got an opportunity for people. The only thing is it's changed now because the product is no longer wood. It's a host of other things. And the sooner the profession realizes that and recognizes, again, goes back to my concerns or earlier concerns about the need for specialization. And we're all part of a team now, and technicians and specialists and foresters and all of that are all part of a team, and we just got to work together and get these issues behind us. Because it's basically more than just putting out logs now. The main thing now is maintaining forest health.
Right.
And we're not, if you maintain forest health, you can handle a whole pile of things.
Yeah.
You can handle logs, you can handle water, you can handle wildlife, but you got to have a healthy forest. That's the maintenance of it.
Timber, 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 o'er the mountains high, timber, down the canyon wide, timber, let me rove and ride through timber, timber, when the day is done, by the campfire's gleam, timber, let me lie and dream of timber, tall timbers calling, timber, and the echoes ring, timber, all nature sings a song along the timber trail, blue shadows falling, timber, down the canyon vale, the whispering pines entwine along the timber trail, high in the sky above, the love song of the trees will blend and wend its way out on the breeze, tall timbers calling.